Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, where Zero Trust practitioners and leaders share unfiltered stories, leaving the marketing fluff behind. This is not another vendor pitch. It's a nonprofit community project founded for the people navigating the real Zero Trust journey. The views expressed are personal opinions and do not represent any organization. This content is for educational use only.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Zero Trust Journey podcast, to another episode of the Zero Trust Journey podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Steve Turner, and I'm joined by one of my co-hosts here, Dr. Victor Manga. And today we've got a special guest with us in what we hope is going to be a long-standing feature here on the Zero Trust Journey around diving into architecture, engineering, implementing all of the technical goodness that comes with implementing a Zero Trust strategy. I'd like to introduce our guest, Tom Stahl. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us, a little bit about your background, kind of what you're doing currently.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm a senior solutions architect. I focus on the end user computing space for a top 6 bank in the U.S. And my role is really a fascinating one because I don't have operational duties and I focus on what does the future of the end user computing space look like, as well as working with key partners in our cybersecurity, identity, other areas to make sure that as we implement new solutions, that we are keeping all of those different areas in mind as we build things out.
That's awesome, Tom. Yeah. And Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll skip my introduction. I think for those who've been listening to this podcast, they know me by now. But what I was going to say is today's conversation is a little bit different than what our usual episodes. Today, we're going to get into the weeds. This is a geek talk, guys. So this if you're expecting more or less, we're going to give you the geek talk today. Really, if you were an engineer, architect, administrator, and you were pulled into an office with a big 20 people and told that you now have to go implement zero trust strategy, where do you go? So in the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to unfold that. If that what interests you, stay tuned on and listen to Tom, what he has to share. We're calling this segment as field stories or the war stories, if you will. But that's what we want. We want people, because with zero trust, a lot of time, it's still considered as, yeah, I get it, but what do I do with it? We're going to talk about it today. What do we do with it?
Tom, initially when we met for the prep session for this episode, I know from us being friends, former colleagues, all of that, your heart is very much like in the endpoint management space. And I feel like it doesn't get its due when we talk about security. And I know you're very passionate about it. I would love to hear from you, because you are like the connective tissue between all of these different, departments, anywhere that you've worked. What has been your experience with that? The pluses, the minuses, the successes, the failures, we want to hear about.
Sure. So let me get started off. So a little bit of my background. I started out at a large pharma company, and I did a 6-month rotation in Active Directory, DNS, DHCP. I did a 3-week rotation in our service desk, and then a 6-month rotation in our firewall, remote access, and proxy team. And I can't tell you what a better way to get introduced to enterprise IT than your directory, your firewall, proxy, remote access, and also understanding the service desk aspects of it. But shortly after that, I got asked to be the mobile guy. In fact, my team lead pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you suck at firewalls. Why don't you be the mobile guy?" I was like, "Done. Let's do it." So mobile is funny, which is my background, and I'll give it a kind of a basis here because I think it's a really good understanding of zero trust. So I like to joke that enterprise mobility was zero trust before zero trust was cool, right? So we had containerized applications. I had a CISO of mine tell me that he assumed all of my mobile devices were inflicted with pestilence. And it's a phrase that I just absolutely love, and it's stuck with me. And so the cool thing was, so as I've implemented multiple enterprise mobility solutions across my career, what I learned was we couldn't just go through and say, okay, we were the mobile team, we're going to deploy a mobile solution that's going to meet our needs, right? Mobile platform as a solution was only really meant for how do I connect to other solutions and other systems. And so if I would deploy you a mobile solution, but I didn't connect to your Exchange environment, nobody wanted to use it, right? There was no interest in it. So what I found very fascinating was I ended up being, again, as you mentioned, that connective tissue, right? So I had to go to all these other teams, understand their solutions, and understand how I could present them in a mobile format that was different than what they were used to. So they would come to me and say, "Hey, we have an Exchange upgrade." I say, "Great, I'm doing cert-based authentication to your environment." And they'd go, "We didn't test that." I go, "Okay, well, let's make sure we go through and test this in low environments and all of this stuff. But what we learned very early on is I was able to deploy a solution that was both a good user experience, but also incredibly secure. And so when I had the solutions that were containerized in their applications, difference between iOS and Android. We can talk about that a little bit, but it's fascinating because I'm able to go through and say, hey, the data that's in the Microsoft Teams app, for instance, when I'm logged into my persona as a bank employee, I see a different experience than when I logged in as a persona of my Gmail. And so it's really interesting to be able to have that segmented data to be able to say, what do I want to offer the user at that time, depending on what they want to do. And so again, mobile's a great baseline for Zero Trust because it gave people just-in-time access. It segmented the data. It allowed you to verify your authentication with biometrics, right? So all of the things that I'm going to talk about doing in an enterprise Zero Trust implementation, you just have to look at what did we do in mobile 10 years ago? So it's fascinating.
Yeah,
No,
and I'll add
go
one
ahead.
thing, Steve. I think when Zero Trust, we started talking about it, device was the center of it. It always been, because that's how you communicate to your enterprise applications. That's how you communicate internally. That's how you communicate externally. That's where you go and click on things so that you can fall for the ransomware and all that. I think then eventually the identity tagged along with it, with devices, so that when you're looking at the device and endpoint holistically, you have identity, because without identity, you can't log into it. Without identity, you can't prove who you are, where you are, and all that. In your journey, when you're looking at mobile devices and endpoint computing 10 years ago, was identity conversation as part of the conversation? And 10 years later, how has that changed?
Yeah, so I mean, identity is key, right? And so understanding that partnership between the identity and the device really make a big difference. And so I can build the greatest, most secure devices I want, but if the user can't log into it, it's worthless. And so understanding what is that identity, and especially as we move from a on-prem identity to a cloud identity, again, mobile was the first one to be able to do cloud identities. And then now when you're starting to see the desktops catch up, it's fascinating on my enterprises today with the Zero Trust implementation. My user never has to come back to the data center, right? My device never does. There's no reason to, because we're starting that Zero Trust journey and being able to do that. But that's all based on the identity, especially. So we're a big Microsoft shop in my background that I've used. And so utilizing Azure Conditional Access, or Entra Conditional Access as they call it now, is absolutely key, right? Being able to build out the policies on which you understand when can you connect, when can you do it, when do you multi-factor, when do you go through and review that is really, really key. And so having a good understanding as a Zero Trust implementer of identity, especially of conditional access, is paramount. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that just have no understanding of what conditional access was. And so I ended up being one of the conditional access experts throughout my entire career because I had to know it, because I had to say, listen, we need to open this, set this policy, set it to go through and say, okay, review these 30 policies and block, allow, do these things under these conditions. And so one of the things that we've really implemented, or I've helped implement at one of the organizations that I've been at, has been utilizing Microsoft Intune device compliance. And so what we've stated is you're able to go through and allow me to authenticate using those conditional access and those identity policies if your device is compliant. Well, you verify that device compliance state via a whole list of Microsoft Intune device policies. You can do this with a lot of the Unified Endpoint Management Solutions, or UEM solutions. And so by doing that, you're able to go through and say, okay, I maybe not, whereas before I would say if you were coming from my known IP addresses. Well, known IP addresses are a terrible route, right? Somebody could come into your network, plug things in. Most organizations don't have great network access control, or NAC, right? And so being able to go through and control on the device side to say if the device is compliant, you're able to do the login aspects, as well as tying that in with the user. Where are you connecting from? What are you expecting them to connect to? And so some of the built-in, I like to call it the magic that Microsoft uses to go through and say, oh, Tom normally connects from this area. If Tom all of a sudden starts connecting from Germany, hey, let's flag that. Let's start going through and having it reviewed, maybe force multi-factor, do some of these other things. So again, that tying together of the device side and the user side, absolutely paramount.
No, Tom, I love the call outs on that. And I want to go back to like an earlier comment that you had made, because I think that it's really interesting, and I didn't expect to dive into this, but I do have a question around it, and then I kind of want to pivot. So you said you started off your career being able to do like a rotation among a bunch of different areas and understanding things like network security, understanding things like identity. I feel like that gave you like powers, like around being able to understand all of this, especially because I remember back when, mobile device management, even if you even want to call it that, was like an Exchange Active Sync policy that was pushed to the device, and you could only
You just
wipe
dated
the
yourself,
whole
Steve.
device.
You just dated yourself. Just saying.
Yeah, like I know. But
I
so
deployed
like,
those. The best thing about those, Steve, is that people didn't know that you could fully wipe their device. So as soon as you irritated the IT admin, they were like, "Oh, darn,
Yeah.
your device got wiped. We don't know why."
so weird. Yeah, like, and there was no
Superpowers,
like,
right?
talk
As
about
Steve
audit
said.
logs and stuff like that. There was no traceability for like all of the stuff that you were doing. So, basically, I heard you also you talked about mobile device management again. You talked about MAM, mobile application management. And then now we've got this combination of all of those things through UEM, that incorporates all of those technologies. For folks that are starting off their career now, because again, you had this awesome opportunity to rotate through all those things so that you could talk to all these other teams and not get one pulled over on you, like when they're like, oh, we can't do it, or we don't know how to do it. It's like, well, I can teach or I can mentor and I can educate. What advice would you give to folks starting their career now so that they can get, the type of exposure that you got, or they can come in with that level of knowledge or seek out that knowledge to be pretty well rounded and kind of help out, implementing, zero trust or another security strategy within their work?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I would say is building a network and building relationships. I've been as successful as I have been because I build relationships. And so as I work with somebody, I'm always there to help them. I'm always there to add value into that conversation, and then building that relationship so that later when I pick up the phone and call them, they're there to help me. And so understanding, when I learn how somebody else does their job and I say, oh, hey, did you know that I can help you with this? And then adding value to them makes a huge difference. And so building those relationships, whether it's with your firewall team, with identity, exchange, any of those different groups, to be able to be value add to them. Now, if you're just starting out, I think you want to start understanding, looking at the basics, right? What does it look like to, mobile devices? What's, Intune? What's identity? What's conditional access? And starting to kind of see some of these things. There's a lot of free resources, especially LinkedIn Learning has a bunch where you can start digging into them. Honestly, just follow Steve Turner. You'll learn a whole bunch of stuff, right? But
We all do.
when you see these different things and understanding, and I don't understand identity the way Steve does, right? But I've got a good idea where I can, do maybe 40%, maybe even 60%. And then I go, okay, after this level, I need to talk to somebody who knows it more in depth. And then being able to do that and kind of help people out, but also understanding it is really key. So I would say, again, building relationships. The other thing that I do and have done really successfully in my career has been building relationships with vendors. And so understanding, when I reach out to somebody at Microsoft, at somebody at Zscaler, at somebody at whatever of these organizations, because I've built that relationship and kind of worked with them, they answer, we're able to move things forward because of it. And that's really, really key.
So that's weird that you didn't call vendors the enemy in the statement that you made.
No.
Which, I can tell you that, Victor and myself and other folks that have come on the show, because we've had guests from multiple backgrounds, like, vendor, customer, practitioners, analysts, and the old school mentality, I feel like, is that vendors are the enemy and that they are out to get you. And, I feel like some of that was perpetuated by the industry. Some of that was perpetuated by kind of just the old school mentality. So I love hearing your advice about partnering with vendors. It's like if you chose a vendor to bring them in, there's a reason that you chose to bring them into your organization. There is value to partnering with those folks to realize your stuff. And if they're not willing to partner, if you feel like you're being treated like a money bag or anything like that, maybe you don't have the right vendor in there. One follow-up question and then, yeah, go ahead, Victor.
Sorry, I was just going to say that there is one thing to that as well, right? With the vendors, it's a two-way street. Maybe the way Tom is actually talking to them, helping them, having the conversation, it's not transactional. Because he's talking to people, humans. Yes, they represent a vendor, but maybe he's not trading them as a vendor, as transaction. And that's usually how we see vendors, like, okay, I just need this. You're the vendor, just give me that. Don't ask me more questions. Don't tell me more things. Just give me that because you're the vendor. How dare you ask another follow-up question? Maybe Tom's approach is, and maybe Tom, you can enlighten us with that. It's not that. It's not as simple as transactional. It's here's what my problem is. Let's have a conversation as a peer, as someone subject matter expert, as someone who maybe has done more research into the space. A lot of time when it comes to IT or security, we treat vendors as the service people that they are, that, okay, I just need this, don't ask me anything. And they feel limited as well. Like I can't have a conversation here. So maybe, sorry, Steve, I cut you. You were going to ask a follow-up question, but maybe just double click on that one. How did you build those relationships with vendors? Why do you feel that you could have the partnership with the vendors where most of the people that they're icky about it? So give us your insights.
So I'll caveat this with saying, I don't know that everybody should interact with vendors the way that I do. I'm a bit of a jerk to them, but I'm also very, very open with them. And so it depends on the scenario, it depends on who I'm working with. But in general, I make sure that the vendor is absolutely crystal clear on our expectations, what we're doing, what we want them to do, what we want to help them with. But I'm also very quick to reach out and saying, hey, how can I help you? And so it's an interesting mix. Again, if a vendor screws up, I will tell them, listen, you screwed up. This is a problem. We need to fix it. What do we need to do to get to the end of this? And I will say it very, very clearly, to the point where I'll get a message from someone that says, did you really just tell the vendor that? I'll be like, yes. But whenever I ask the vendor, because I'll reach out to them afterwards and I'll say, hey, are you okay? And they say, yeah. They say, we appreciate how open and direct you are.
There you go.
Like, we may not like what you have to say, but we're really glad you tell us. We'd much rather that than you go back the next day and say, all right, well, the vendor didn't provide what we need, so we're not going to keep working with them anymore. And I will say that directness and clarity that I provide, again, whether or not it's pleasant all the time, it's not. But
that's
it helps
the
build
key,
deep
right?
relationships.
Yeah, having the clear communication, and that's key to almost everything. And when you talk about it, not everybody put the effort into it. To provide clear communication, you have to put an effort to actually write it or provide the
Absolutely.
communication, setting the right expectations. Half of the times I have seen where the security or IT is in front of a vendor and saying, I don't know, show me everything you have on your truck. Or I don't know what I want. What can you help? Like, I don't know. I mean, vendor can't just magically read your mind or read your infrastructure and your security policies and tell you what you want. That's what you are here for. So maybe, Tom, that's the key takeaway from your clear communication, setting the right expectation. But that's what the level of effort you have to commit to. That's what the level of effort you have to put into this relationship, and it becomes two-way street. It doesn't have to be.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be that we're going on dates every evening, but it could be as simple as that. When we need something, it's clear communication, but I am going to put an effort to it.
Yep.
I
Absolutely.
thought that AI was supposed to know exactly what the customer needed, Victor. Like, I thought that was what all
Hey,
of
that
that.
was patent. I told you in a super secret and under NDA. Now you're just revealing it.
Yeah, so Tom, thank you for your perspective on that. I wanted to dig into another thing that you'd mentioned and kind of get the current state of things and the struggles that folks kind of have around this. So a comment that you said about like mobile device management and kind of just mobile device implementations in general was that they had zero trust before zero trust was a thing. And I totally agree with your statement, because it's wild to me that Apple, Google, have poured so much investment into introducing APIs, controls, all of these different things to lock things down to a certain point so that enterprise customers, folks can feel comfortable knowing that their data is segmented on the device. We talk about segmentation all the time when it comes to zero trust. But I know on the flip side of things, when we talk about Mac OS, we talk about Windows, we talk about Linux, all of the more desktop-y servery operating systems, that's definitely not the case. But I know it has been getting better. So I would love to, if you could share some of your journey on that end, because I know you brought in mobile device management around that for, desktop OSs and stuff like that. And I know that's not been an easy journey, like
Right.
just having, adventured with you on some of that journey and, just knowing your background, tell us, like, what have you experienced there? What advice do you have for folks, like on that end?
Sure. So a couple of things is really understanding your use cases. And so there are point solutions that you could utilize for many, many different things, right? Corporate laptops, whether that's Mac or Windows devices, they serve a purpose. And so if you're looking to go through and providing somebody a device and you say, hey, we want to do iOS coding, right? You provide them a Mac. You want to do, hey, all I need to do is do a browser. You can provide them whatever device you want, whatever the user prefers. So there's definitely some aspect of user choice in it. But as an enterprise, understanding what to offer to people, you want to have enough choices where people feel like they get to choose, but then also you want to make sure that you have a small enough pool that you can control it and manage it well. But as you're talking about, I mean, there are options like secure browser, right? Island.io is a great example of one where you want to provide a specific point solution to do a browser that does a thing. VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure, which is now moving more and more to cloud PCs, with Horizon moving to Omnissa and all of the turmoil in the Omnissa and Citrix space. I think you're going to see Microsoft, especially with Windows 365, pick up a lot of that market share because it's easy, right? That team has done a phenomenal job. Especially with their new thin clients that they're offering, the Windows Links. And there's a lot of different opportunities for, when you're talking about a physical device that's in front of you, right? That's what a lot of your people are going to use, but that's not what everyone's going to need, right? Maybe you have an outsourced solution that you want to provide a virtual machine for, and you want it as close as possible. The Windows 365 or a virtual machine makes a lot of sense for that. But especially as you move away from everything's in my data center, you start getting away from I'm managing all the bits and the bolts to all of a sudden I'm managing a service. And when you're managing a service, it's very easy to make it work, very hard to secure it and do it well. And so as you're building these things out, I laugh or I joke that in the IT space, I'm no longer building things out and fighting with my security teams. I'm now partnering with security, and we're going through and saying, hey, how do we deploy this in a way that meets your needs and makes the best experience for my end users? Because at the end of the day, right, if I don't give them a good solution, they're going to talk about it on an unsecured, unapproved channel like Signal.
When it comes to endpoint computing, when it comes to the desktop management, that's one aspect of it. But how they interact on the other side to, let's say, internet or enterprise applications, that also needs to be tied into this. When you talk about zero trust strategy, you talk about holistic. Okay, as Victor, I present an identity. And then from there, I have a device. From there, I have enterprise applications. Or maybe if you have an example, share with us or your views or thoughts about it. How do you tie them all together so it becomes more like a cohesive policy engine than managing security policies from endpoint side or endpoint desktop versus the application side versus the identity side? How do you make it a little bit more work cohesively? Because that's a common challenge or complaint we hear. When companies, organizations start zero trust journey, everybody's on board with it. But as they start talking to their teams, identity has their own policies, network team has their own policies, workspace team has their own policies for the enterprise applications, and it's just, they never work together. Like there's always an Excel which is mapping, or there's always a ServiceNow ticket which is like, okay, I have this part. So is there a way to just, even it could be a mnemonics that, hey, remember this? And that's how you make your policies work.
Yeah, so I know for me, again, it goes back to relationships. And so building out is if I'm the one that's doing the implementation of the Zero Trust platform, I want to have that communication with those different groups. You want to be able to, as much as possible, pipe everything into a similar SIM and something like a Sentinel from Microsoft or a Splunk. Sure. Being able to go through and having a single pane of glass for a lot of that data is key for your security teams and especially your operation centers. But the bigger thing is understanding what people are doing, right? And so if you're talking about your device and saying, okay, we're going to route all our traffic through, a ZTNA solution, zero trust networking,
network access, yeah.
Access, thank you. Like a Zscaler, a Netscope, or one of those. And so as you're building those things out, with the implementation, really having the right teams together and making sure your identity team's on board and they're going to understand how the authentication is going to work and your security MFAs, all of those different pieces. If you're not on the same page with people, you're going to be running into a lot of roadblocks. So again, making sure that your security teams are aware, you communicate with people, hey, this is what we're doing. Getting the workforce teams in the beginning of it helps, because otherwise you're just going to be like, hey, we deployed this. And they're like, yeah, that's not going to work for us because we're doing these other things, right? Building the relationships in general, I like to bring everyone together, throw a whiteboard in there and some pizza and say, don't come out until you're done. And at the end of the day, you get people really, they start building out, okay, if you get them all on the same vision and on the same path, you get the architects and the senior engineers to build it together. They're going to go, okay, I see where we're going. Here's where I'm going to build my stuff to help us get there. And we actually did that at one of the large banks I'm working with. And what we found was when we deployed the device compliance from Intune that we said, we actually built a baseline for the Zero Trust platform before it was even a thing where they said, hey, we want to do this. And I said, good news, I've got your base right here.
Nice. That's excellent. Yeah. One of the surveys we recently did, and I want to get your take on it. The respondents said that automation is changing the game of doing this. So a lot of the vendors or the solution providers, they have APIs or webhooks these days. So they're saying instead of actually managing the policies as a point solution, as you said, bring everybody on the same table, agree upon like a standard policy, but now implement into the point solutions using some sort of automation. So instead of like having to pick up the phone and ask Joe every time when you are trying to make a change and then trying to coordinate with different people. The changes are done at this central automation level, but the decisions are coming from different angles, if you will, or different subject matter experts. But as long as you have the zero trust policy defined, agreed upon, and then you come back every quarter, refine it, tweak it, change it, but the automation is taking over the actual execution, verification, assurance, and violations. Have you seen any of that as well, Tom?
So I work with large banks, and with our regulations, that's not doable, right? You can't have the automation do a lot of the changes due to, the change policies and all those things that you need. And realistically, right, if I was the person who had to pick, do I want the automation to do it or not? There are some things that I would love automation for, right? Tracking changes, understanding what's going on, working with
Sure.
notification. But at the end of the day, clicking the actual button to go through and say, hey, does your API allow me to, say, wipe every device in my fleet? The answer is yes, they probably do. Do I want the automation having that ability? I don't know that I do. And so especially when you've got so many disparate systems with so many different things that are changing constantly, it's very concerning when you go through and you say, okay, well, we automated it. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? And so I think you want to automate tasks that are easy to do, especially reporting and some of these things. But when you have we're making changes, especially making changes in mass, I think you have to be very, very careful, or else you can cause a lot more impact. Nobody wants to be the CrowdStrikes, right? You don't want to have, hey, we did this, and look, we automated it. Oh, great, we took down a third of the internet.
Yeah, totally. Someone said that to me, and I'll quote it here, that if a person is spending 70% of the time doing manual tasks repeatedly every day, that's a good place to actually automate. I don't know if that's a fact for everybody else, but that's how I read it as well. If it's taking you a long time, or the same person is doing the same task every day repeatedly, just automate it. There's enough technology out there. So yeah.
It really depends on the task, though, right? If the task requires somebody to understand what they're doing,
Sure.
That makes a big difference, right? If I'm just going through and, the Milton from Office Space, right? Yeah, automate that for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at something and saying, okay, I need to review this to make sure it's not going to cause significant downstream impact, I think you need to be very careful with the automation in those aspects.
Yeah. No, 70% code was more as a checklist. I'm just going Milton from the Office Space. Yeah. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, Tom, if you had to highlight like some of the significant technical challenges that you've run into, like what would you call out? Like, I know that you've dealt with multiple identity providers, multiple UEMs, multiple computing solutions kind of playing into all of this, multiple networking security solutions being involved in the mix, and trying to create some semblance of something that is a better experience and, better secures the enterprise with like more visibility and all of those things. What would you call out as the top technical hurdles that you've run into?
Yeah, I would say understanding your solutions and understanding how they interact with other solutions. So if you are, in general, you probably won't have one person who's in charge of everything. So you're going to be saying, okay, and for my area, right, the endpoint space, understanding how that interacts with Exchange, with our secure web gateway, understanding those interactions, and again, goes back to building relationships. When the team that owns, the Zscaler platforms changes things, we need to make sure that we're lockstep so that we say, oh, well, did the team that also makes sure that Microsoft Teams still works, are they aware of that? Building those relationships. And really what I've seen is when you start losing, when that communication breaks down, that's where you all of a sudden go, oh, no, somebody made a change over here. That breaks this. And then you get, C-suite being very upset to say, why did X, Y, and Z break? What happened here? And so I think that it's funny because it's not a technical change. It's not a technical hurdle of saying, okay, it's this technical piece. I do think it is much more relational. And when you have people who are looking and saying, no, this is my little space. Don't interact with me. Don't touch my lane. I think you can really struggle. And so having that broad communication, I like to say that we have the communications where you are able to talk to others around you and build that like center of excellence. I don't love that term, but I like the idea behind it. And so when you can say, I joke, I have a Teams chat called Me and the Council of Identity. And I talk to all of my identity people because there's, 6 or 8 of them. And I say, hey, I want this to change. Hey, how do we get to passwordless? Hey, how do we do these things? And then having that communication and being able to collaborate with all of those different areas and groups is really key. So I guess that would be my answer, even though it's not a specific technical hurdle. If you need a specific technical hurdle, I'm going to say certificates, because certificates can be a huge pain in the butt. If they work great, they're awesome, but as soon as they break, they explode everything, right? And nobody has a cloud PKI, and then Microsoft charges extra for it. It's a whole thing. So, certs are awesome until they're not. How's that? Oh, and check your CRLs, because if you implement certs without a certificate revocation list or not one that they're checking, why are you even doing it?
I love that call out around it. So kind of like pulling the string on the thing that you called out is kind of like the hurdle that you've run into. And again, I know what you've shared with me from our experience working together and kind of collaborating, but how would you recommend somebody who is looking to do the thing that you're doing, where you are opening up these communication pathways between different departments so that something can be accomplished rather than the siloed nature that they've typically been in? Because the other thing that Victor and I constantly preach on the program here is that if you are still living in silos, you're not going to get anything done, like around, pursuing zero trust or any semblance of a cohesive security strategy. So what would you recommend to people if they wanted to start building that out in an organization that doesn't communicate today?
Yeah, so I've got a great example. So the last two companies that I've joined during COVID, fully remote. And again, relationally, it was what I talked about, so important. So I came in with a list of positions. So let's say I think I had 15 or 20, security architect, or cybersecurity architect, network architect. And I started listing all these positions. And I went to my leadership and I said, give me a name for each one of these areas that I can go and meet and make friends with and build relationships with, because I need to work with each one of these groups and understand it. I had the same thing for my vendors, right? I came in, I said, I want contacts for the Microsoft and the Zscaler, and we just went through the list of these are our key vendors. And these are the key people, and I want to understand that, right? I laugh, right? I've got 30 people that are assigned to my organization from Microsoft account. I don't talk to 28 of them. I talk to the 2 that actually add value, and then I go around them to the product group whenever I actually need something, right? So that's how it works, depending on, again, but you build those relationships, right? If I'm nearby one of those 2 people, I'm going to make sure I see them, go have a beer, shoot some pool, build those relationships so that I can do that. And so, that's both on the vendor side and also on the internal side. So understanding those key roles that you say, hey, if I don't know who's the head of our SOC, I'm doing my job wrong, right? And I want to make sure that I then reach out to them and I say, hey, SOC team, I'm doing this kind of shady new thing. Keep an eye out for it and don't fire me, right? I've sent that email quite a few times.
That's huge. That's huge. Again, I know that you said, specifically it's not a technical hurdle. And I like to joke about certificates. Who hasn't experienced that, unfortunately? But I love the call out, you talking about building that relationship internally and externally, treating everybody as partners rather than adversaries, because there's the actual adversaries that we're trying to defend against. And kind of hand in hand with that, I love that you talked about, and just to paraphrase kind of what you were saying, was figuring out what's in it for me and what's in it for you, and making sure that there's a Venn diagram across the commonalities between those two things. Because I've worked so many places where somebody tries to shove a strategy, their fiefdom down your throat, and it just does not end up in a good situation and nothing gets done. So I think it's great that you're highlighting that, because it just shows that, when people talk about why can't we implement zero trust within our organization? Why can't we make this a better experience? Maybe the hang up isn't technical things. Maybe it's actually relationships and cohesive communication. I love that you said that you sent an email to the SOC about what's going on, because that could have been a panic and an all hands on deck situation for something that was not, an all hands on deck situation.
Well, it might have been. I was doing shady things. So I wanted them to know, I was bypassing all our security controls to test something.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to tell them hey, keep an eye out for this. But if you didn't have something that was automated that told you there's a problem, you should.
Yeah.
So I want to hand it over to you, Victor, if you had anything else that you wanted to ask Tom.
Yeah, we'll wrap with this one, Tom. We started with this statement that today we will talk about Zero Trust tactical plan, and we covered a lot of ground there. Let's wrap on this one. If you were to give our audience and listeners advice who are starting their Zero Trust journey, not from the strategy perspective, but really tactical to the engineer, architect level, what are the 3 or 5 things that you would advise them to go check that, or make sure they verify that, make sure they have that as a baseline, or make sure that they consider it? What would you advise from a tactical perspective to our audience?
Yeah. So the first is, I would say, prototype it, right? When you can go through to your leadership and show them a physical device that's a zero trust device built with Microsoft Autopilot that has all the fancy stuff, the biometric authentication, fully zero trust, that's, cloud joined, cloud native. When you can say, hey, look, see this, compare this to our current solution, which is much more encumbered, you're going to see people are going to go, oh, I want that. How do I get to that? Right. So showing them that North Star, especially on the endpoint side, is key. And additionally, I would say, again, reviewing your conditional access policies for those that use Microsoft tooling, it is so key, right? A lot of people just don't understand them. And I think understanding how they are, what they do, what they don't do. Even today, I hear people constantly tell me, I think conditional access is the problem here. I'm like, no, conditional access is doing exactly what it's supposed to. We just don't understand it, right? Or, okay, let's flip the switch, let's do a change. But then also, I would say, again, building relationships with these security teams, and especially the architecture side, right, as they're building new things, understanding what does that identity look like. I would say passwordless is something that is a good goal, but as we've coined it, we're not going passwordless yet. Right now we're working on password less, so less passwords. So how do you go through and say, all right, well, we can, remove a password from this experience. We're going to do, we recently implemented Windows Hello for Business, being able to go through and say, I can log into my computer with my face, right? That's one time we're doing less. How do we go through and take small steps to be able to provide a better, more secure experience in the future? And then the last one I would just say is, again, working with your partners, figuring out where you want to go, where your vendors can go is going to be really key. Because if you go through and say, hey, we're going to build our solution around solution X, solution Y, you're going to want to make sure that all of the ancillary solutions that integrate with it, X or Y, can and are aware of it. And then also working through with specifically, I always encourage people to talk to and understand that the product group members from the different vendors makes a huge difference when you talk to somebody that really understands the solutions that you're discussing.
Totally. I think we should end on this high note. Our listeners have gained so much insights. Again, the tactical portion of it. Steve, Tom, I want to thank you both and our listeners to really get to the point where, what do I do with this thing called Zero Trust? And we covered a lot of that. So again, thanks so much. Thank you everybody who listened to it, and tune in for our latest and upcoming episodes, ztjourney.com.
That's a wrap on this Zero Trust journey. Now it's your turn. Step into the spotlight, share your story, and be part of the journey. Subscribe to Zero Trust Journey on LinkedIn for the latest news, events, and giveaways. Until next time.